time to begin reviewing for the row reduction test. We're going to skip right into it. What entry should always be the first to turn into a 0? Always the bottom left-hand corner is what you want to change to a 0 first. Giving you an example of a matrix in row echelon form, to be row echelon form, everything below the diagonal would need to be a 0. Everything else above and on the diagonal can be any numbers whatsoever. If you have an augmented column, they can be any numbers as well. But below the diagonal is the important part, must be 0. Reduced row echelon form, the diagonal's got to be 0, or 1s I mean, everything else got to be a 0, and same thing, the augmented column can be any number you want. Okay, now to actually write a matrix for this, we just take the coefficients. So for the first one, you got 3, -2, -1 with 7 in the augmented column. 1, -1, there are 0 z's, so we put 0 in that column. 12 in the answer column, and then 4, 6, 2, and -3 for the last column. Alright, and now, to give an example of what that matrix right above might look like when it's completed, well, what's going to be is you need to make the left-hand side in row echelon form, or reduced row echelon form, I should say. And then the guys on the right would just be your answers. I don't know what the answers are going to be, so I'm just going to write random numbers. Who knows what they could be, but those could be possible answers. Alright, so let's get now right into it. Actually performing row operations. This first one is saying us to add rows 1 and row 2 and plug it into row 2. Well, that means that row 1 has not changed. I would start with that. Row 3 has not changed. And then from there, what I'm going to do is see how the middle row did change. So what I'm going to have, like that color, we're going to have 2 plus -2 is 0, 1 plus 5 is 6, 3 plus 0 is 3, 3 and -1 gives you 2. So that is your new row 2 in that part. Okay, in number 2, all we're doing here is row 3, and we're multiplying that by 2. So, again, the first 2 rows in this case are not changing. The last row is what will change them. And what I'm going to have here, when I multiply row 3 by 2, I'll get 0, 4, 6, and 8. Just like that. Alright, in number 8, what they're asking you to do is swap row 2 and row 3. So, nothing changes with row 1. But row 2 and 3 are just going to change position. So row 3 now will become row 2, and row 2 now will become row 3, just like that. And the last guy here, they want to take row 2 and divide it by a -3. So the top row and the bottom row still haven't changed. So I put those guys in first so I don't forget about them. And then all I do is take the middle row and I'm dividing it by -3. So I'll have -1, -2, +1, and -4 for those entries. Alright, continuing forward, we want to perform the next step in our row reduction process. Okay, so in this case, what we look for, we already have this 0 done, so we always go up before we go over. So this -3 is what I should be trying to change next. So to do that, I would need to have it match with the guy above it. Well, I can't do that right now, so to do that, I'm going to have to multiply the top row by a 3 and the middle row by a 2. So that means the bottom row still is the same. I'm going to make the top row, when I multiply it by 3, it'll be 6, 18, 9, and -3. And the middle row now is going to be -6, 16, 0, and 6. That's all you have to do is just show what that next step would have been. Okay, for this guy here, I haven't changed anything yet, so I need the bottom left entry where I start to be into a 0. They're already the same number, so all I'm going to do is I'm going to add row 1 and row 2, and I'm going to plug it in to row 2 because that's what I just circled. So the top row is still the same. Bottom row is going to be the sum. So 1 plus -1 is 0, 4 plus 2 is 6, 12 and -6 is also 6. And that's all you have to do for this step. Number 12, we're in the very last step because we're in reduced row echelon form if I can just turn these guys into 1s. So to do that, I'm going to divide the top row by -4 to make it a 1, and the bottom row by 3 to make it a 1. So the bottom row will be 0, 1, -2 now, and the top row will be 1, 0, -3. Okay, and then the last guy, the only thing left to turn into a 0 is this 3. So to turn that into a 3, I would have to add with something below it. They're already the same, so I can just go and do it. Row 1 plus row 3 and plug it into row 1. So the bottom rows are still the same. The middle row also still the same. Top row is now 1, 0, because 1 plus 0 is 0, 0 and 0 is 0. 3, -3 is also 0. -5 and 21 gives you a positive 16. Alright, so now let's get into actually solving some systems using the row reduction process. First thing you got to do is to write your matrix. So this would be 1, 3, negative 4 for the first row. This is a 6y, so there's 0x's, 6y's, and negative 24 for your answer. Okay, I need to, because everything below is a 0, I need to try to get things above to be a 0. Well, to do that, that means that these guys need to match. Well, I can do that by dividing this bottom row by negative 2. That way I can get, I can get the exact same value in that position I'm trying to change. So that'd be 0, negative 3, and that would be a positive 12. So now I can go and combine these guys and turn that into a 0. So I'm going to have row 1 plus row 2, plug it into row 1. What I'm going to get is 1, 0, and 8 up top, and I should get 0, negative 3, and 12 on the bottom still. My last thing is to try to get everything into a 1, so I should change that to make it happen. And I'm going to get 1, 0, 8 up top, and a 0, 1, negative 4 on the bottom. So your answer is x is 8, and y is negative 4. Continuing here, number 15, same thing. We want to first start by going with the matrix, so 2, 2, 0, 4, negative 1, negative 20. What I'm going to do first is I need to eliminate the bottom left entry first, so it needs to match with the guy above it. Well, to do that, I need to make row 1 something different. I need to multiply it by negative 2. That way, when I do that, now my top row will be negative 4, and 0, with my 4, negative 1, negative 20 on the bottom. Now I have these two numbers being the exact same, but with different signs, which is what I need to have happen. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to take this, I'm going to do row 1 and row 2, and plug them into row 2, because that's what I need to change. So when I do that, top is still the same. The bottom now is going to be 0, negative 5, and negative 20. Okay? As I move myself over, I need to turn this guy into a 1. So to do that, I'm just going to divide this bottom row by a negative 5. So I should just have the same up top. And this will be 0, 1, negative 4 on the bottom. Or I'm sorry, not a negative 4, that'll be a positive 4. Oh, if I can get it out of there. It'll be a positive 4 because I divided by negative 5. Okay, continuing on with this now, I need to turn this top value into a 0. The only way I can do that is by matching it with the guy below it. So I'm going to take row 2 and multiply it by a 4. That way when I do that, I now will have the same up top, of course, and this row will be now a 0, 4, and 16. So when I do that now, as I'm trying to eliminate this, I can now add them together because they're the same value, different signs. So I'll have row 1 plus row 2, plug it into row 1. So it'll be negative 4, 0, and 0, 0, 4, and 16. I'm sorry, this top entry should not have been a 0. Let's get rid of that. I should have done 16 plus 0, which was 16. Alright, the last step is just to divide each row to make those pivot positions, those diagonals, into a 1. So I'm going to divide the top row by negative 4, bottom row by positive 4. So I should get 1, 0, negative 4 up top, 0, 1, positive 4 on the bottom. So x should equal negative 4, y should equal positive 4. Alright, and number 16. Continuing forward, we're going to have 3, negative 4, and 1, negative 5, 2, and 3. I need to get the bottom left entry into a 0. The only way I can do that, I can't multiply 5 by anything to get to 3 or vice versa. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the top row, multiply it by 5, bottom row, multiply it by 3. So when I do that, I should get, up top, I should get 15, negative 20, and 5 in the augmented column. I should get negative 15, 6, and 9 in the bottom row. Now I can add these guys together because when I do that, I'll be able to cancel out, excuse me, I should be able to cancel out what I need to cancel out to make that into a 0. So I'm going to add row 1 and row 2, plug it into row 2. So when I add these rows together, the top row stays the same. I'm adding these together, I get 0, I should get negative 14 and positive 14. And now what I need to do is I need to turn this position into a 0. And to do that, I'm just going to divide that second row by negative 14. Or to turn it into a 1, I should say, not a 0. So to do that, top row is still the same. Bottom row is not going to be 0, 1, and negative 1. To To be able to move forward from here, I need to work with this top position right here. It needs to turn itself into a 0 somehow. Only way I can do that is if it matches with the guy below it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to multiply that bottom row by 20. So it would be 0, 20, and negative 20, with the top row still being the exact same. Now I can add those two rows together. So my top row will now be 15, 0, and negative 15. Bottom row 0, 20, and negative 20. And the last step is just to divide each row by its leading entry. So divide the top row by 15 to get 1, 0, negative 1. Divide the bottom row by 20 to get 0, 1, negative 1. So I should get x equals negative 1 and y equals negative 1. Okay, now the fun part, the 3 by 3s. Again, you're only going to have 1 on your test itself, but I gave you 2 just to have an extra 1 to practice. So let's start with the matrix, 2, negative 4, 5 with negative 33. All the way through writing down your coefficients. All right, you have a couple different options here. What I'm going to notice, though, is I need to get both of these guys into a 0. Really doesn't matter which one I do first. We always say the bottom left is the best way to go, but these are the first two guys I should do first. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to combine the top two rows just to give you a little different idea what to do. And I'm going to plug it into row 2. So row 1 and row 2, plug it into row 2. So that'll give me a 0, negative 2, 2, and negative 14. Top still the same. And the bottom, like so. What I need to do here is I need to get the bottom left entry now to be a 0 as well. What I could do, I would multiply this entire top row by a negative 2. That way I would have a 4 and a negative 4. I can do that in a whole other entry. I'm just going to use a different color and put it up here and say this is like my new row 1. Make it look like that when I multiplied by a negative 2. So now I can combine them together, save myself a step. In my new row I would have 0, because negative 4 and 4 is 0. 8 and negative 1 is 7. Negative 10 and 0 is negative 10. And the augmented column should be 61. Okay, everything else stays the same to negative 14. And I can even put this back to my original guy in red without wasting any steps. Alright, from here what I need to do is I need to get this guy, the 7, into a 0. Well, the best way to do that would be to somehow make a 2 into a 7 into a 2. Well, I can't really do that, but what you might notice though is that second row can only be divided by 2. So I'm going to divide that all by a negative, or by a positive 2. So I'm going to have something that looks like this right now. It should be a negative 7 there. Everything else should be the exact same. So 2, negative 4, 5, negative 33 up top. Now I can get these to be the same number if I multiply the middle row by a positive 7. So when I do that, this middle row again will be 0, negative 7, 7, and negative 49. I'll still have 61 on the bottom, 0, 7, negative 10. Top row I still am not touching until I absolutely have to. To get rid of that 7, I'm looking at the same spot here. To get rid of that 7, I'm going to add these rows together. So the row 2 and row 3, plugging into row 3. So I'll have on the bottom row now 0, 0, negative 3, and positive 12. I should have everything else still the same. Now my steps from here should be pretty straightforward. Because once I'm in row echelon form, it should be easy. I'm going to start by getting this guy into a 0, or I'm sorry, into a 1. What I can also do is I'm going to kind of combine steps. I know all those numbers can be divided by the same number. So let's do that to make things a little easier on ourselves. So I'm going to take row 2 and divide it by a 7, and row 3 and divide it by a negative 3 to make it a 1. So the bottom row now will be 0, 0, 1 with a negative 4. This will now be 0, negative 1, 1, negative 7, 2, negative 4, 5, negative 33. Is that what I want? Yes. Okay, so this number right here is what I'm going to need to turn into a 0. To do that, it needs to match up with the guy below it. Well, right now they're opposite signs, so let's adjust this. Instead of dividing by 7, let's make it by negative 7, making that a positive 1, a negative 1, and a positive 7. Now I can add those two rows together. It'd be row 2 and row 3, and I'm plugging into row 2. So it'll be 0, 1, 0 when I add these, and it'll be a positive 3. My bottom row still is the exact same. This will be 2, negative 4, 5, negative 33 still up top. Now I can work on the top entry and make that into a 0 somehow. Well, what I'm going to need to do to cancel out the 5, I'm going to need the bottom row to be a negative 5. So I'm going to multiply that entire bottom row by negative 5. To get the 4 to go away, this will have to be a positive 4. So I'm going to multiply that whole row by a positive 4. Top row I still have not changed yet. And now I just need to actually do the addition going on here. So what I'm going to do first is I'm first going to add row 1 with row 3. And I'm going to plug that into row 1. So when I do that, I'm still going to have 2, negative 4. This will now be a 0 when I add these guys together. And that'll be a negative 13 on the end when I add them together. The middle guys are still the exact same. And the bottom guy is still the exact same, with 12 and 20 in the answer column. Now I can add row 1 and row 2. Plug that into row 1 to finish us off. I'll now have 2, 0, 0, and negative 1. 0, 4, 0, and 12. 0, 0, negative 5, and 20. And my last step is just to get all those diagonals into a 1. You do that by dividing each row by that leading entry. So divide by 2, divide by 4, divide by negative 5. So it'll be 1, 0, 0, and this will be a negative 1/2 when I divide by 2. 0, 1, 0, and 3. 0, 0, 1, and negative 4. So your answer is x is negative 1/2, y is positive 3, and z is negative 4. All right, one last example of a 3 by 3. Again, we're not going to have 2 of these on the test, just 1 to see if you can work your way through it. Okay, so what we're going to start with is obviously writing the matrix. So I'm not sure why I started with the bottom, but I did. 2, 1, 1, 4 in the middle row, and 1, negative 2, 3, and 7 on the top row. What I'm going to do first is I need to make the bottom left entry into a 0. So the way to do that is I'm going to have to combine it with one of these two rows. Well, it's going to be easier to make a 1 into a 3 than a 2 into a 3. So I'm going to multiply this entire top row by a 3. And again, if you want to, I'm just going to show you the little shortcut. I'm going to kind of change that top row into a 1, from a 1 to a 3, a negative 2 to a negative 6, from a 3 to a 9, and a 7 into a 21, just by multiplying by 3 right there. Now I can add them together and plug it into row 3. So it'll be a 0, a negative 4, a 7, and a negative 10. This guy stayed the same, and I'm going to put the top guy right back where it was because I liked it better with the 1. From here, now I need to eliminate the 2 in that middle row. So to do that, I'm going to need to combine it with the guy above it. So I'm going to do the same thing I did. I need to make this into a negative 2. I do that by multiplying everything by a negative 2. So that is now my new row 1. So now I can combine these together again, and I'm going to plug it into row 2 now. So the bottom row is still the same. My middle row now is going to be 0, 5, negative 5, and negative 10. Top row I'm going to put right back where it was at the beginning because those numbers were nicer. Okay, from here, what I'm going to notice is that, well, there's a couple different ways I could do. My next step is to get this negative 4 into a 0 somehow. What I'm going to notice, though, is that, well, I can divide everything in the middle row by the same number. So just to try to make things look a little neater, I'm going to do that first. I'm going to make that 0, 1, negative 1, negative 10. Keep everything else the same for now. 1, negative 2, 3, and 7. And again, I could have done the same thing like I did before. I could have done that right in here, called that 1, negative 1, and negative 2. And it would help if I actually would call over here what it's supposed to be called, which is not negative 10, but a negative 2. Alright, so I can do that there. Either way, I end up with the same thing. What I need to do now, though, is to get rid of that negative 4, it needs to match with this 1 that's right in the middle of the entire thing. So this 1 right here is what I need to change to make this negative 4 go away. So I'm going to do that just by simply multiplying that middle row by a positive 4. Keep everything else the same. 1, negative 2, 3, and 7. Okay, now I can add to eliminate and plug in row 3. It's going to be row 2 plus row 3 to eliminate this guy here in the bottom middle entry. Okay, so 1, negative 2, 3 up top with 7, still 0, 4, negative 8, and this will now be a 0, 0, 3, and negative 18, I believe. And see, here's where one little mistake, if you try to rush, can end up messing yourself up. Let me go back and correct something here. Right from the beginning, when we added row 1 and row 3 and plugged into row 3, I didn't do that in the augmented column. 21 plus negative 10 should have been a positive 11. So this should be stayed as 11. This should all be 11 the whole way through. So now when I add these guys together, negative 8 and 11 should give you a positive 3. Always got to check and make sure that you're not rushing yourself. Don't make the same mistakes I do. Okay, what I'm going to do now, row 2 and divide it by 4, turn that into a 1. And I'm also going to make row 3 and divide it by 3 to turn that into a 1. So I can make some easy numbers going on here. And this will be a 0, 1, negative 1, negative 2, still 1, negative 2, 3, and 7. What I'll do from here is I need to turn, as I work my way up, turn the negative 1 into a 0. I'll do that by adding row 2 and row 3, plugging into row 2 plus row 3. So still not changing the top row. This will be 0, 1, 0, negative 1 when I add those two rows, and the bottom row stays the same. Now, to finish this off, what I need to do is I need to get this entry into a negative 3. That way it will cancel out with the guy up there, and this guy into a positive 2. That way it will cancel out with the entry right above it. So I'm going to do one at a time. First I'll do it with the bottom entry. So I'm going to keep the bottom rows the exact same that they were. This top row will now be 1, negative 2, 3 and negative 3 gives you 0, 7 and negative 3 gives you 4. That's when I was doing row 1 and row 3 into row 3. And now I'll do it with row 2. So this will now, like I said, I want it to be a 2. Multiply that whole row by 2. That way I can add them together. So it'll be a 1, 0, 0, 2 up top. And keep my original guys there, back as they were. Or not negative 2, that should be a negative 1 from my original. So, x equals 2, y equals negative 1, z equals positive 1, and you have your answer. Best of luck, take your time, don't make silly mistakes like I do, and you'll be just fine.